announced a 35% tariff on Canadian goods to go into effect on August 1st of its own. The letter says the 35% tariff will apply to all Canadian imports, separate from the existing levies on autos, steel, and aluminum.
On the evening of July 10th, the world learned of a new tariff announcement from President Donald Trump. A 35% duty, blanket, across the board, set to hit all Canadian imports starting August 1st. Not just on cars, not just steel or aluminum, but everything. And this time, there was no press conference, no back and forth with reporters, just a letter, posted online, addressed to the Prime Minister of Canada. A threat disguised as policy. A warning cloaked in grievance. It may seem like just another number in Trump's long list of trade salvos. But to Canada and to the broader global economy, 35% isn't just a number. It's a signal that the North American partnership is now under open strain, and the question is no longer if a new trade war is coming, but how deep it might go.
And frankly, Donald Trump just treats Canada like trash over and over and over again. We're supposed to be in a negotiation to try to secure some kind of framework deal to go forward. This letter is just a picket fence of lies.
Trump's stated reasons for the tariff? Fentanyl shipments, unfair trade barriers, and Canada's agricultural supply management system. But none of these are new. What is new is the timing and the escalation. This tariff threat comes just weeks after Canada withdrew its digital services tax to restart negotiations with Washington. That act was seen as a major concession, worth nearly $1 billion Canadian dollars annually. In return, Canada expected serious engagement. Instead, it got a 35% threat letter. At its core, this is classic Trump. Pressure, escalation, and control. The letter even suggested that Canadian companies could avoid tariffs if they moved manufacturing to the United States. Not a proposal, a demand. And just like that, the message is clear. If you want access to the US market, come build inside the walls, or pay the toll. Ottawa's official response was measured. No public escalation, no angry press releases. Instead, Prime Minister Mark Carney kept the focus on diplomacy, quiet, targeted, and strategic. Canada has set a firm internal deadline of July 21st to reach a resolution. Behind the scenes, ministers are working with both U.S. trade teams and international allies. But the calm front masks real tension. Many inside Canada's policy and business circles are urging stronger measures. Analysts warned that Trump's letter an economic missile, and warned that it may be time to stop turning the other cheek. And Carney knows what's at stake. Over 850 billion Canadian dollars in two-way trade flowed between the US and Canada last year, according to Statistics Canada. If a 35% tariff takes effect, entire industries could face shockwaves: lumber, agriculture, small-scale manufacturing, and retail. Already, provincial governments in Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta are pushing back. At the same time, Canada is accelerating trade diversification efforts with ASEAN and Europe. Beneath the surface, steel is being sharpened.
And they do consider China an enemy, they consider Canada an ally. And so he's using this as a stick, as a cudgel, as a weapon to intimidate us into changing something that they don't like.
But this goes far beyond Canada. If Trump is willing to attack America's closest ally, its largest energy partner, its most integrated supply chain, what message does that send to other nations? China may be a strategic rival, but Canada is a trusted defense partner, a G7 member, and NATO contributor. And yet, it's now treated as a threat. For the US economy, tariffs mean higher prices. For Canadian producers, they mean lost contracts and tighter margins. And for global allies, it raises a dangerous question. Can the United States still be trusted to uphold stable trade partnerships? That brings us to July 21st. It's not just a deadline, it's a test of whether trade diplomacy can still work in a world ruled by threats and tweets. Trump has made his move. He's betting that pressure will break the Canadian position, but Canada may have other ideas. With quiet resolve and growing frustration, it now faces a choice: bend under pressure or respond with its own version of steel. Because when 35% becomes the new starting point, what happens next might change the rules for everyone.
We're going to start sending letters out to various countries starting tomorrow, and they'll range in value from maybe 60 or 70% tariffs to 10 and 20% tariffs.
On July 4th, while Americans celebrated their independence with fireworks and parades, President Donald Trump took a different approach. From the East Room of the White House, he launched the next phase of his global trade campaign, announcing that letters would be sent to countries around the world, laying out new U.S. tariff rates ranging from 10% all the way up to 70%. These tariffs, he said, would go into effect on August 1st. The message was clear: sign a deal or face the cost. With agreements already reached with Vietnam and the United Kingdom, Trump felt vindicated. But one country, just across the northern border, remains locked in an unusually tense standoff: Canada. And unlike the others this time, Trump's strategy may hit a wall.
Trump says he plans to spend part of his 4th of July holiday sending letters to countries notifying them of their new tariff rates.
We have a lot of great things going, and we're getting along with countries, but some will be disappointed because they're going to have to pay tariff.
Trump's 90 deals in 90 days campaign has picked up pace. The UK locked in a mini deal. Vietnam accepted a revised tariff schedule. According to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, around 100 countries could qualify for a 10% base rate if they reach terms fast. But Canada is taking a different approach. Rather than rushing into a deal, Ottawa has reopened negotiations carefully, and only after withdrawing its digital services tax to get back to the table. Even so, no agreement has been announced. What's different this time is that Canada, unlike others, seems willing to push back.
Americans are celebrating their country's past and present today on Independence Day, while Canadians are expressing concerns about what the future could hold for the Canada-U.S. relationship.
For months, trade talks between the U.S. and Canada had stalled. In late June, Trump abruptly walked away from the table after Canada moved ahead with its digital services tax, a 3% levy targeting U.S. tech giants. Days later, under pressure, Prime Minister Mark Carney repealed the tax to reopen negotiations. But the concessions stopped there. Unlike other nations, Canada hasn't rushed to finalize a new deal. Instead, it has taken a quieter, slower approach, reopening discussions but refusing to give in to every demand. That includes Trump's likely next target, Canada's dairy sector. Canada's supply management system, which uses quotas and tariffs to protect domestic milk producers, has long been a sore point for Trump. But for Canadian policymakers, it's a non-negotiable pillar of economic sovereignty. Reforms would require political capital, cross-provincial consensus, and potentially an act of parliament. Though dairy was not officially raised, the idea of including it in the talks has triggered political backlash in Canada. And so far, Carney has not signaled any willingness to make concessions. This resistance is more than symbolic. If no agreement is reached by the July 21st deadline, Canada could face tariffs as high as 70% on its steel, aluminum, and auto exports, sectors deeply integrated into U.S. supply chains. The risk here is mutual. According to Statistics Canada, over 75% of Canadian automotive exports, roughly 80 billion Canadian dollars per year, go directly to the United States. Meanwhile, U.S. manufacturers rely heavily on Canadian inputs, especially in the Great Lakes region. Trump's escalating tactics may spark retaliation, not just diplomatically, but economically. If the U.S. imposes sweeping tariffs on Canada, it could disrupt cross-border supply chains, increase prices for U.S. consumers, and trigger political blowback in Midwestern states.
I think the reality is we're dealing with a president who is incredibly abnormal and not something we're used to.
Trump's tariff-first strategy has delivered quick deals in some cases. But with Canada, the calculus is different. This is not a developing economy adjusting its terms to avoid disruption. It's a G7 ally, with the economic weight and political structure to absorb short-term pressure. By pushing too hard, Trump may risk breaking a relationship that has long benefited both nations. A deal is still possible. But if the U.S. insists on unconditional surrender, Canada may choose to walk. And if that happens, July 21st won't just mark a failed negotiation. It could mark the beginning of something far more costly, the unraveling of North America's most vital trade alliance.
That deal. The White House is very hard to read. Do they want a deal or not?
Economy, it will certainly not be good for any economy to tariff each other and back and forth, reciprocal tariffs.
The headlines said Trump won. Canada had backed down, scrapping a digital services tax just hours before it took effect. Trump reopened trade talks and claimed victory. But behind the scenes, the pressure was only building. Now Trump is going further, targeting one of Canada's most vital sectors, auto manufacturing. And as the deadline approaches, Prime Minister Mark Carney is signaling this fight isn't over. This is no longer just a tax negotiation. It's a clash over economic survival, with two nations locked in and one sector at the center.
But, the president keeps talking about sticking points like supply management. Obviously, he's going after our auto sector. So we'll see. It's looming. Only 19 days and counting.
Since March 2025, the U.S. has imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian automobiles, with small carve-outs for U.S.-made parts. The move hit hard across an integrated cross-border supply chain. Canada exports around 85% of its auto production to the U.S., most of it through systems where parts cross the border up to 6 or 7 times before final assembly. But tariffs broke that rhythm. U.S. automakers, facing cost uncertainty, paused many new tooling programs. In Windsor, Ontario, Canada's auto hub, some facilities laid off up to 50% of workers by mid-2025. Even logistics stalled. Truckers reported slower traffic and fewer loads. With over 70% of U.S.-Canada trade moved by truck, the disruption spread fast.
Talking about. Donald Trump seems so intent on destroying Canada's ability to make cars. That seems to be such a sine qua non.
April 2025 brought more bad news. According to Statistics Canada, Canadian auto exports to the U.S. dropped 23% compared to April 2024. The chain reaction was immediate: halted production, idle workers, frozen investments. But amid the damage, Carney began recalibrating. In early July, the Prime Minister met with top executives from Ford Canada, GM Canada, Stellantis, and the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Behind closed doors, they mapped out responses, from legal options to production shifts. One sticking point was Canada's zero-emissions vehicle mandate. As of Q1 2025, EVs made up only 8% of new vehicle sales, yet the law required that 20% of all passenger vehicles sold in 2026 be EV or hybrid. Automakers warned the target was unreachable. Missing it would mean buying carbon credits or paying up to 20,000 Canadian dollars per vehicle for charging infrastructure. Facing economic headwinds and corporate backlash, Carney signaled flexibility, not surrender. He also leaned into longer-term reforms, dismantling interprovincial trade barriers and accelerating free trade efforts with Europe and Asia. It's a shift modeled after Australia, diversifying away from U.S. dependence. This wasn't retreat, it was repositioning. Trump's next deadline is July 9th. That's when his temporary tariff freeze ends. Unless Canada makes new concessions, more tariffs could be triggered, possibly targeting untaxed sectors. But Carney has his own date circled, July 21st. That's the deadline he set for a new Canada-US deal. If no agreement is reached, Ottawa could reintroduce its retaliatory tariffs, covering over $125 billion in U.S. goods, from agriculture to tech. Meanwhile, the public is already pushing back. The Buy Canada movement is growing. Consumers are ditching U.S. wine and spirits. Cross-border travel is down. Vacation homes in Florida are hitting the resale market. Canadians aren't waiting for policy. They're voting with their wallets. Behind the scenes, Canada is also working to expand trade with the EU and Indo-Pacific, building economic resilience far from Washington's reach. The next 2 weeks will decide everything. Will Trump push for more, confident that Canada will blink again? Or has he overplayed his hand, pushing Carney into a corner where retaliation becomes politically unavoidable? On July 9th, we may see the first answer. By July 21st, we'll know who flinches and who fights back. This isn't just about cars, it's about leverage, leadership, and how far each side is willing to go. Stay tuned.